Just immediate family. That was the text message my daughter Megan sent me on Christmas Eve. She told me to stay away. She told me they needed privacy. She did not know that the house she was celebrating and the food she was eating and the wine she was drinking were all paid for by my bank account. She thought I would sit at home and cry. She was wrong. I spent Christmas with someone else, and when I posted the photo, my daughter called me 14 times in a row. But by then, I had already instructed my lawyer to evict them. Before I tell you how I turned their cruelty into my victory, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Your support helps me share more stories like this. The silence in my house was heavy. It was the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. Outside the window, the wind was howling off Lake Michigan, rattling the panes of glass I had designed myself 30 years ago. I am Henry Sullivan. For 40 years, I was the chief architect for one of the largest firms in Chicago. I built skyscrapers that scrape the belly of the clouds. I designed foundations that can withstand earthquakes. But as I stood there in my living room holding my phone with a trembling hand, I realized I had failed to build the one thing that actually matters. A family that respects me. It was 6 o'clock in the evening on December 24th. I was dressed in my best suit. It was a charcoal gray wool suit custom-made on Savile Row. I had polished my shoes until they reflected the lights of the 12-foot Christmas tree standing in the corner. I was ready. I was waiting for the signal to drive over to Megan and Derek's house. I had been waiting all day. Then the phone chirped. Just a single cold notification sound. I looked down. The screen was bright in the dim room. It was a text from Megan. Not a call. Not a voice message. A text. Dad, we are doing Christmas at Derek's parents' house this year. They requested a private evening. Just immediate family. You understand. I ordered you some food on Uber Eats. It should arrive soon. Merry Christmas. I read it once. Then I read it again. Just immediate family. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I am 70 years old. I have gray hair and deep lines etched around my eyes. But my mind is sharp. I understood exactly what those 3 words meant. Immediate family did not include me. Immediate family meant Derek, my son-in-law, who has never held a steady job for more than 6 months. Immediate family meant Preston and Linda Derek's parents, who look at me with sneering smiles because they think my money is new and vulgar. Immediate family meant my own daughter, the girl I raised alone after her mother died, the girl whose college tuition I paid in full, the girl whose wedding cost me $80,000. I was not immediate family. I was the wallet. And tonight, the wallet was not needed, so the man attached to it was discarded. I slowly lowered the phone to the marble countertop. My heart was not racing. In fact, it was beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. Thud, thud, thud. It was the rhythm of a door closing forever. I turned my gaze to the sofa. There was a pile of gifts there. I had spent weeks choosing them. For my grandson Leo, I had bought the massive Star Wars Lego set he had circled in the catalog. It was the Millennium Falcon. It cost $800 and was sold out everywhere, but I had called in a favor to get it. I imagined his face lighting up when he saw it. Next to it was a small velvet box. Inside was a vintage Omega watch from 1965. It was for Derek. I knew he loved watches, or at least he loved appearing wealthy. I wanted to show him that I supported him, that I wanted him to succeed. What a foolish old man I was. And for Megan, there was an envelope. Inside was a check for $50,000. It was supposed to be a surprise to help them renovate the nursery for the new baby they were planning. I walked over to the sofa. I picked up the heavy Lego box. For a second, a flash of hot red anger blinded me. I wanted to throw it into the fireplace. I wanted to smash the watch against the wall. I wanted to tear the check into 1,000 pieces and let them drift down like snow. But I stopped. No. That is what a weak man would do. That is what a senile, emotional old man would do. And that is exactly what they think I am. I gently placed the Lego box back down. I set the velvet box on top of it. I leaned the envelope against the stack. I arranged them neatly like a display in a museum. I wanted them to stay exactly there. When the Uber Eats driver arrived, I would tell him to keep the food. I would leave these gifts here as a monument to the love they threw away, a monument to the moment Henry Sullivan stopped being a father and started being a businessman. I walked to the hallway closet. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors. I pulled out my long black cashmere overcoat. It was soft and warm, a coat meant for a man of substance. I buttoned it up all the way to the chin. I wrapped a silk scarf around my neck. I put on my leather gloves. I checked my pockets. Wallet, keys, phone, and the small black notebook I always carry. The tools of my trade. I did not call Megan back. I did not text her and beg. I did not ask why I was excluded. Asking for an explanation gives them power. It implies that their decision is valid enough to be discussed. It was not valid. It was an insult. And you do not negotiate with insults. I opened the Uber app on my phone. The driver was 2 minutes away. I canceled the food order. Then I typed in a new destination. I was not going to a sad diner to eat pancakes alone. I was not going to a movie theater to hide in the dark. I typed in the Drake Hotel. It is the most historic, elegant hotel in Chicago. It is where kings and queens have stayed. It is where my late wife, Catherine, and I had our first date 45 years ago. The lounge there serves the best martinis in the city. The Christmas tree in the lobby stands 20 feet tall, decorated with real glass ornaments and velvet ribbons. If I was going to be alone, I would be alone in luxury. I would be alone with dignity. I opened the heavy oak front door of my house. The bitter wind hit my face, immediately stinging my cheeks. The snow was falling in thick white sheets covering the driveway. I stepped out, locking the door behind me. The click of the lock felt final. I looked back at the house one last time. The lights were on inside. It looked warm and inviting. A passerby would think a happy family lived there. They would never guess that the man who built it was standing in the snow, cast out like a stray dog. But as I walked down the steps to the waiting car, I felt something shift inside me. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They wanted to be just immediate family. They wanted to enjoy the lifestyle I provided without the inconvenience of my presence. Fine. I got into the back seat of the car. The interior smelled of leather and pine air freshener. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. "The Drake," I said. My voice did not shake. "And step on it. I have a celebration to attend." As the car pulled away, leaving my empty house behind, I took out my phone again. I looked at Megan's text one more time. Just immediate family. I deleted the thread. Tonight I was going to find out what family really means. And God help them when I do. The caulk-door lounge inside the Drake Hotel hummed with a specific kind of energy. It was the sound of crystal glasses clinking against marble, the low murmur of jazz from a piano in the corner, and the soft rustle of expensive fabrics. It was a place where people came to be seen, or in my case, to disappear in plain sight. I walked past tables filled with laughing groups, families toasting with champagne, and couples holding hands across candlelight. Every smile I saw felt like a tiny needle pricking at the fresh wound my daughter had inflicted. I found a stool at the far end of the mahogany bar, away from the noise. I ordered a Macallan 25 neat. The bartender, a man who looked like he had been polishing glass since the Prohibition era, nodded silently. He knew better than to ask a man drinking alone on Christmas Eve how his night was going. As I stared into the amber liquid of my scotch, swirling it gently, I sensed a presence to my right. It wasn't intrusive, just a shift in the air pressure. I glanced over. Sitting 2 stools away was a woman who commanded attention without saying a word. She appeared to be in her mid-60s, though she possessed a timeless elegance that defied numbers. She wore a crimson dress that was tailored to perfection, the kind of garment that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. Her hair was silver cut in a sharp, chic bob that framed a face of striking intelligence. But it was her eyes that caught me. They were looking at her own drink, a clear martini with a twist of lemon, with the same intense burning resentment I felt in my own chest. She was spinning a diamond ring on her finger. Around and around. It was a nervous habit that betrayed her composed exterior. "Rough night for the heavy hitters," I said. My voice was low, barely audible over the piano. She stopped spinning the ring. She didn't jump. She simply turned her head slowly to look at me. Her eyes scanned my face, taking in the bespoke suit, the grief in my jawline, and the solitude. She saw right through me. "It is only rough if you care," she replied. Her voice was smooth like velvet wrapped around a blade. And unfortunately, I think we both still care too much. I raised my glass in a mock salute. "To caring too much," I said, "and receiving too little in return." She let out a dry, humorless laugh and clinked her glass against mine. The sound was sharp. "I am Veronica," she said. "Henry," I replied. We drank in silence for a moment. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was the comfortable silence of 2 soldiers sitting in a trench while the war raged somewhere else. "So, Henry," she said, placing her glass down, "why is a man who clearly knows how to dress himself sitting alone in a hotel bar instead of carving a turkey?" I took a breath. The truth was sitting on my tongue, bitter and heavy. I decided to spit it out. "My daughter sent me a text," I said. I pulled out my phone, but I didn't unlock it. I just held it like a weapon. She said this year they wanted to celebrate with just immediate family. Apparently, the father who paid for the house they are celebrating in does not qualify as immediate. Veronica's eyes widened slightly. A flicker of genuine anger passed across her face. "Immediate family," she repeated, testing the words as if they tasted sour. "That is a cruel phrase. It is sanitary, legalistic. It cuts deep." It did, I admitted. "She is with her husband's family. The Sterlings. Do you know them?" Veronica paused. Her hand tightened around the stem of her glass. "The Sterlings, Preston and Linda Sterling." I nodded. "Yes. My son-in-law is Derek." A strange expression crossed her face. It was a mix of recognition and disgust. But she didn't elaborate. Instead, she leaned in closer, her perfume smelling of jasmine and cold winter air. "Well, Henry, you are in good company," she said. "I am currently banned from my son's house in Aspen." "Banned?" I asked. "That is a strong word." She shrugged elegantly. "My daughter-in-law says my energy is too controlling. She says I make her anxious. Funny, my energy wasn't too controlling when I wrote the check for her startup business last month, or when I funded my son's entire venture capital portfolio. But tonight, they needed space. So here I am. The bank is closed for the holidays." We looked at each other. 2 successful people, 2 architects of other people's happiness left out in the cold. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. We had spent our lives building foundations for our children, only to be told we were no longer part of the structure. "They think we are obsolete," I said. "They think we are just wallets with a pulse." "They underestimate us," Veronica corrected me. Her eyes flashed with a dangerous light. "They think because we love them we are weak. They think we will sit at home and wait for them to throw us crumbs of affection." I looked at the Christmas tree in the lobby. I thought about the Lego set sitting on my sofa. I thought about the check I had written. I am done waiting for crumbs, I said. Good, Veronica said. She reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone. It was the latest model. She held it up. Do you have social media, Henry? I nodded. I have a Facebook account. I mostly use it to keep track of old colleagues and see photos of my grandson. Perfect, she said. Let us show them that we are not sitting at home crying. Let us show them that immediate family is a fluid concept. She moved her stool closer to mine. The scent of jasmine was stronger now. She held the phone up high, angling it so the golden lights of the bar and the festive decorations were behind us. Smile, Henry, she commanded. Smile like you just won the lottery. Smile like you do not need them. I hesitated for a second, but then I thought of Derek's smug face. I thought of Megan's dismissive text. I looked at the camera lens. I forced the corners of my mouth up. Then, looking at the fierce determination in Veronica's eyes, the smile became real. It was a smile of defiance. I leaned in. Our heads touched. We looked like a power couple. We looked happy. Click. She showed me the photo. We looked radiant. We looked like we owned the city. Send that to me, I said. She airdropped the photo to my phone. I opened my Facebook app. My hands were steady now. The alcohol and the adrenaline were doing their work. I selected the photo. I tapped the text box. I needed a caption. Something that would not just prick their conscience, but stab it. I typed slowly. Immediate family is who you choose. Merry Christmas with new friends. I showed it to Veronica. She read it and smirked. It was a wicked, delightful smirk. Post it, she whispered. I hovered my finger over the blue button. This was it. The point of no return. If I pressed this, I was declaring war. I was stepping out of the shadows of being the quiet, supportive father and stepping into something else. Something dangerous. I pressed post. The little blue bar loaded across the screen. Done. The photo was live. Veronica raised her glass. To new traditions, she said. To immediate family, I replied. We drank. I set my phone on the bar counter screen facing up. 1 minute passed. The jazz music played on. 2 minutes passed. Then the screen lit up. It wasn't a notification. It was a call. The name on the screen flashed in big, bold letters. Megan. I stared at it. Answer it, Veronica said softly, watching the screen. Let them hear the music. The phone stopped ringing. Then it started again immediately. Megan. Then a text message notification slid down. Then another. Then the phone started vibrating violently, dancing across the polished wood of the bar. It was a frenzy. It was panic. I looked at Veronica. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was watching the phone with the calculated gaze of a chess player who just watched her opponent walk into a trap. Why is she calling so much? I asked. It is just a photo. Veronica picked up her olive and took a bite. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw the true weight of who she was. Because, Henry, she said calmly, your son-in-law Derek has been telling people in this town a lot of stories. And in that photo, you are sitting next to the one person who can prove they are all lies. I frowned. Who are you, Veronica? She took a sip of her martini. I am the woman who was about to give your son-in-law $20 million, she said. Until about 5 minutes ago. The phone rang again. This time it was Derek. I picked it up. The ice in my glass had melted just enough to water down the last sip of scotch. It was a pleasant numbness, a temporary shield against the reality of the night. For 30 minutes, I had almost forgotten about the empty house waiting for me in the suburbs. I was just a man having a drink with a charming, intelligent woman who understood the specific pain of being a parent who gave too much. We had been discussing the architecture of the hotel, the way the Gothic arches framed the ceiling, when the peace was shattered. It started as a low hum against the marble countertop. My phone, which I had placed screen up next to my napkin, began to dance. It buzzed with a violence that made the bartender look over from polishing a glass. The screen lit up, casting a harsh blue glow in the dimly lit bar. The name Megan flashed in bold letters. I watched it ring. I did not reach for it. I let it vibrate until it stopped. The silence lasted for exactly 2 seconds. Then it started again. Same name. Same frantic vibration. Veronica looked at the phone, then at me. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were sharp. She took a sip of her martini, waiting to see what I would do. The phone stopped. Then it rang again, and again. 14 times. The number 14 felt significant. It was not a call of concern. A daughter concerned about her father calls once, maybe twice, and leaves a voicemail. 14 calls in rapid succession is not worry. It is panic. It is the sound of someone losing control. On the 15th ring, I finally reached out. My hand was steady, which surprised me. I slid my finger across the green icon and lifted the device to my ear. I did not get a chance to say hello. "Dad, are you insane?" Megan screamed. Her voice was shrill, cracking with a hysteria I had never heard from her before. It was so loud I had to pull the phone an inch away from my ear. The jazz music in the bar seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the chaotic noise on the other end of the line. "Where are you?" she continued, not waiting for an answer. "Who is that woman? Take it down. You have to take it down right now. Do you have any idea what you are doing?" I took a breath to speak, to ask her why a simple photo with a friend was causing such a meltdown, but she was cut off. There was a scuffling sound, the noise of a hand fumbling over the microphone, and then a man's voice took over. It was Derek. But it was not the Derek I knew. It was not the arrogant son-in-law who spoke to me with condescending, slow words, as if I were a child. It was not the man who had laughed at my old coat, or rolled his eyes when I offered advice on home repairs. This voice was breathless. It was high-pitched. It was the voice of a man watching his life crumble. "Henry, listen to me," Derek stammered. I could hear the background noise of his parents' house, the clinking of silverware, the murmur of confused guests. "Henry, you need to delete that photo immediately. Right now. Do not talk to her. Do not say a word to her. Just delete it and get out of there." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my scotch. The liquid burned pleasantly in my throat. Why, I asked. My voice was calm, a stark contrast to his frenzy. "I thought I was not immediate family, Derek. I thought my personal life was none of your business. I am just enjoying my holiday." "You do not understand," he yelled, abandoning all pretense of respect. "You stupid old man, you do not know what you are doing. That woman is Veronica King." I looked at Veronica. She was watching me over the rim of her glass, her eyebrows raised in faint amusement. She knew exactly who she was. "I know her name," I said to Derek. She introduced herself. "She is quite charming, unlike my family tonight." No. Derek was hyperventilating now. "She is the lead investor, Henry. She is the one holding the check. If she sees you with me, if she thinks we are connected, she will pull the funding. She will ruin the deal. You are going to cost me $20 million. The words hung in the air between us. $20 million. Suddenly the fog lifted. The pieces of the puzzle, which had been scattered and confusing, snapped into place with a satisfying click. This was never about privacy. It was never about his parents wanting an intimate gathering. It was never about me being old or embarrassing. It was about business. Derek had obviously told Veronica and her firm a story, a specific narrative to sell himself. And for some reason, my existence or my presence in his life contradicted that story. He was not ashamed of me socially. He was afraid of me financially. I was the loose thread that could unravel his entire tapestry of lies. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who realizes he is holding a royal flush while his opponent is bluffing with a pair of twos. So I said slowly, letting him hear the realization in my voice. You are worried that my new friend Veronica will not like the truth. Henry, please, Derek's voice dropped to a desperate whisper. I will explain everything. Just delete the photo. I will come pick you up. We can celebrate together. Just fix this. I looked at the woman in the red dress sitting next to me. She looked expensive, dangerous, and utterly calm. She was not a woman who tolerated liars, and Derek knew it. I am afraid I cannot do that, Derek, I said. I am busy. What do you mean you are busy? He shrieked. I am having a drink with a very interesting woman, I said. And she was just about to tell me why a man like you is so terrified of her. Henry, do not, he screamed. Goodbye, Derek. I pressed the red button. The line went dead. I placed the phone face down on the bar. The vibration stopped. The silence returned, but this time the air around us felt electric. It was charged with potential. I turned on my stool to face Veronica fully. She had heard enough of the conversation to understand the gist of it. She set her glass down on the coaster, with a precise, delicate movement. Your son-in-law sounds distressed, she said, her voice smooth and devoid of sympathy. He is, I agreed. He seems to think you are the Grim Reaper. Veronica laughed, a low, throaty sound. To men like him, I suppose I am. I leaned in, resting my elbows on the polished wood. I needed to know. I needed to know exactly how deep the betrayal went. He said you would ruin his deal, I said. He said you would pull the funding if you knew he was connected to me. Why, Veronica? What did he tell you about me? Veronica turned her body toward me. The playfulness was gone from her eyes, replaced by the sharp, analytical gaze of a shark in the water. She reached into her clutch bag and pulled out a slim silver phone. She tapped on the screen a few times, scrolling through documents. He did not tell us anything about you, Henry, she said. That is the problem. She slid the phone across the bar to me. It was a PDF document, a due diligence report. I looked at the screen. I saw Derek's name. I saw the name of his shell company. And then I saw the section labeled Personal Assets and Family Background. Read the second paragraph, she commanded. I squinted at the small text. As I read, my stomach dropped. The words blurred for a second, then sharpened into focus. It was a lie so bold, so audacious, that I almost admired the sheer nerve of it. But then the admiration turned to nausea. Derek Sterling, the document read, is a self-made entrepreneur. Following the tragic death of his wife's parents in a car accident 3 years ago, he has been the sole provider for his family, managing the modest inheritance left behind while building his own empire. I froze. I read it again. Tragic death of his wife's parents. I was dead. According to Derek Sterling, according to the official documents he had submitted to ask for $20 million, Henry Sullivan was dead. I looked up at Veronica. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from a rage so hot it felt like lava in my veins. He killed me, I whispered. Metaphorically, Veronica said. And financially, it seems. Because if you are dead, Henry, then who signed the deed to the house he listed as his primary collateral? The house, my house, the house I bought. I stared at her. Exactly, she said. If you are dead, you cannot own a house, which means the signature on the mortgage transfer he showed us last week is a forgery. She took her phone back and slipped it into her bag. I told you, Henry, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It is a rough night for the heavy hitters, but it is about to get much rougher for Derek. She signaled the bartender for the check. I think we have finished our drinks, she said. Do you have a car, or should I have my driver bring the Rolls-Royce around? I looked at my empty glass. I looked at the phone that was still silent now, likely because Derek was currently vomiting in his parents' bathroom. I stood up. I buttoned my cashmere coat. I felt taller than I had felt in years. Your car would be lovely, Veronica, I said. I believe we have a Christmas party to crash. Veronica did not waste a single second. The moment Derek hung up the phone, the atmosphere around us shifted from a casual evening drink to a war room. She placed her phone flat on the polished mahogany bar. Her fingers moved with the speed and precision of a pianist playing a complicated concerto. She was not texting. She was issuing commands. It is Christmas Eve, I said quietly. Your staff will not be working. Veronica did not look up. She kept typing. Money does not sleep. Henry, she replied. And neither does my head of risk management. If Derek Sterling is trying to defraud my firm, I want to know exactly how he plans to do it before I finish this martini. She pressed a final button and set the phone down. We waited. The bartender refilled my water glass, but I did not drink. My throat felt dry, but it was a dryness caused by fear, not thirst. I was afraid of what I was about to learn. I was afraid that the disrespect I felt earlier was only the tip of a very large, very ugly iceberg. 3 minutes later, a notification chimed. It was a soft, elegant sound, but it hit the table like a gavel in a courtroom. Here it is, Veronica said. She opened a file attachment. It was a 100-page due diligence report. She swiped past the legal disclaimers and the corporate jargon. She went straight to the section titled Executive Summary and Background Check. She turned the phone so I could read it. The font was small, but the words were clear. Applicant Derek Sterling, requesting $20 million for Series A funding. $20 million. I stared at the number. It was a fortune. It was more money than I had accumulated in 40 years of hard labor. Derek, a man who could barely manage his own credit card payments, was asking for $20 million. Read the biography, Veronica whispered. She pointed a manicured fingernail at the second paragraph. I leaned in. The screen brightness stung my tired eyes. Mr. Sterling comes from a lineage of real estate developers, the text read. Following the tragic and untimely death of his father-in-law Henry Sullivan earlier this year, Mr. Sterling took over the management of the family estate. I stopped reading. The air left my lungs. I read it again. Tragic and untimely death. I am sitting right here, I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. I am alive. I am breathing. Keep reading, Veronica commanded. Her voice was cold as ice. I forced myself to continue. The estate, currently in a complex probate process, includes significant residential and commercial holdings in the Chicago area. Mr. Sterling has successfully leveraged these assets to build the initial capital for his venture. He presents himself as a self-made steward of a legacy, stepping up to protect the family wealth after the sudden loss of the patriarch. I pulled back from the phone. I felt sick, physically sick. The room seemed to tilt slightly to the left. It was not just a lie. It was a complete erasure of my existence. Derek had not just excluded me from a party. He had killed me on paper. He had buried me. And then he had stood on my fresh grave and delivered a eulogy about how brave he was for spending my money. He stole my life, I whispered. He did not just steal my money. He stole my identity. He painted himself as the hero who saved the family while I am apparently rotting in a cemetery somewhere. Veronica swiped to the next page. This is the financial breakdown, she said. Look at the collateral. I looked. There it was. My house. The house I bought with the bonus from the Sears Tower renovation project. The house where I raised Megan. It was listed as the primary asset securing the loan. Value $1.5 million. Status inheritance pending transfer. I slammed my hand down on the bar. The sound was loud enough to make the couple at the next table jump. "That is why he needs privacy," I said. The realization burned through me like fire. It is not because he hates me. It is because I am... ability. If I walk into that party tonight, if I shake hands with anyone from your world, his entire story falls apart. You cannot inherit a house from a man who is standing in your living room drinking eggnog. Exactly, Veronica said. She took a sip of her drink, her eyes locked on mine. You are not a guest, Henry. You are a ghost, and ghosts are not supposed to show up at Christmas parties. I thought about Megan, my little girl. Did she know? She must know. She sent the text. She agreed to the lie. She agreed to kill her own father to help her husband play dress-up with borrowed money. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. It severed the last thread of hope I had that this was all a misunderstanding. It was a conspiracy, a cold, calculated conspiracy committed by the two people I loved most in the world. He is trying to be a chaotic aristocrat, Veronica mused, looking at Derek's photo on the file. He wants the prestige of old money without the work. He wants to be you, Henry. But he does not have the talent to build, so he decided to steal. I stood up. I could not sit anymore. The energy inside me was too volatile. I needed to move. I needed to do something before I exploded. I am going to that house, I said. I am going to walk through the front door. And I am going to show every single person in that room that Henry Sullivan is very much alive. Veronica stood up with me. She picked up her clutch. She picked up her phone. A small, dangerous smile played on her lips. It was the smile of a predator who just spotted a wounded animal. Do not just walk in, Henry, she said. That is too small. That is too messy. I looked at her. What do you suggest? She tapped the screen of her phone. I am the lead investor, she said. Or at least I was until 5 minutes ago. Derek thinks I am his savior. He thinks I am the golden ticket to the life he desperately wants. If I show up at his door, he will not turn me away. He will welcome me with open arms. He will think he has won. She walked around the bar stool and stood next to me. She was tall in her heels, almost eye level with me. You need a ride, she said. And I need to see the look on his face when his dead father-in-law steps out of my Rolls-Royce. She extended her arm. Do you want to play a big game, Henry? She asked. Because I am free tonight. And I hate fraud even more than I hate bad wine. I looked at her arm. Then I looked at the door of the hotel, where the snow was still falling. I thought about the empty house waiting for me. I thought about the lie in the file. I took her arm. Let us play, I said. We walked out of the bar together, leaving the warmth of the jazz music behind, stepping out into the cold night to deliver a storm that Derek Sterling would never forget. The ride to the house was silent, but it was the silence of a predator stalking its prey. Veronica's Rolls-Royce glided over the snow-covered streets of Chicago like a phantom. I sat in the back seat staring out at the passing streetlights. Every block we passed brought us closer to the home I had purchased 3 years ago. It was a beautiful colonial revival in Lincoln Park, a neighborhood where the trees were old and the property taxes were high. I remembered the day I handed Megan the keys. She had cried. She had hugged me and told me I was the best father in the world. Now, as the car turned onto the familiar tree-lined street, I wondered if that hug had been real, or if it was just another transaction. The house was dark. They were all at Derek's parents' place celebrating their exclusive immediate family Christmas. The driveway was empty save for a few drifting patches of snow. It looked peaceful. It looked innocent. But I knew better. I asked Veronica to wait in the car. Are you sure, Henry? She asked, her hand resting on the door handle. I need to see it alone, I said. I need to know exactly what I am walking into before we drive to the party. I stepped out into the cold air. The wind bit at my face, but I barely felt it. I walked up the pathway I had paid to have paved with imported brick. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my keyring. There was a small brass key there. I had kept it for emergencies. I had imagined using it to water their plants while they were on vacation, or to let in a plumber if a pipe burst. I never imagined I would use it to investigate a crime against myself. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. I pushed the door open and stepped into the foyer. The house smelled of pine needles and expensive vanilla candles. It was warm. It was comfortable. It was everything a home should be. But as I walked further inside, the feeling of wrongness began to crawl up my spine. I moved to the living room. The first thing I noticed was the fireplace mantel. For years there had been a framed photograph in the center. It was a picture of me and my late wife Catherine on our 30th anniversary. It was the anchor of the room. It was meant to remind them of the people who made their life possible. The photo was gone. In its place stood a large, glossy portrait of Derek's parents, Preston and Linda. They were smiling broadly, wearing matching white sweaters, looking like the owners of a country club. I felt a physical blow to my chest. I walked over to the bookshelf. I looked for the picture of me holding Megan at her college graduation. Gone. I looked for the photo of me holding my grandson Leo in the hospital the day he was born. Gone. I began to open drawers. I pulled open the bottom drawer of the console table, the one usually reserved for coasters and spare batteries. There, buried under a tangle of old charging cables, lay the face of my wife. The frame was cracked. My photos had not just been moved, they had been discarded. They had been hidden away like shameful secrets to make room for the lie Derek was selling. To anyone visiting this house, Henry Sullivan did not exist. I closed the drawer slowly. My sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. If they had erased me from the walls, what else were they hiding? I turned and walked toward the hallway that led to Derek's home office. The door was ajar. I pushed it open. The room was a mess. Papers were scattered across the desk, and an overflowing trash can sat in the corner. This was the workspace of a man who was drowning. I sat down in his leather chair. It squeaked under my weight. I turned on the desk lamp. The harsh yellow light illuminated a chaotic spread of bills, unopened envelopes, and architectural blueprints for a renovation I had never approved. I started sifting through the papers. Credit card bills, overdue, utility notices. Second warning. It was pathetic, but it was not criminal. Lots of people were bad with money. Being bad with money does not make you a fraudster. Then my eyes caught something sticking out from under a stack of car magazines. It was the corner of a thick, heavy envelope. It had a red stamp on it. I pulled it out. The return address was the First National Bank of Chicago. The recipient was Derek Sterling. But underneath his name in smaller print were the words, acting as executor for the estate of Henry Sullivan. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a document titled Notice of Default and Intent to Foreclosure. I read the legal jargon. It stated that the mortgage payments on the property were 6 months behind. It stated that the bank had attempted to contact the borrower multiple times without success. It stated that if the outstanding balance of $1.2 million was not paid, within 30 days, the bank would seize the property. I stared at the number. $1.2 million. This was impossible. I had bought this house for $1.5 million in cash. There was no mortgage. I held the deed. The title was clear. It was in my name, held within a revocable living trust. How could there be a mortgage on a house that was fully paid for? And how could Derek stop paying a mortgage that should not exist? I looked closer at the loan documents attached to the notice. The date of the loan was 6 months ago. The purpose of the loan was listed as cash-out refinance. And then I saw it. The signature at the bottom of the loan application. It was my name, Henry Sullivan. But it was not my handwriting. The loops were too wide. The slant was wrong. It was a clumsy, desperate forgery. But a bank does not just hand over $1 million based on a scribbled signature. They need proof. They need verification. They need the owner to be present, or at least to provide a notarized power of attorney. I dug deeper into the pile of papers. I felt like an archaeologist digging through the ruins of my own life. I found a folder marked legal. I flipped it open. And there it was. The missing piece of the puzzle. The key to the crime. It was a death certificate. It was a certificate of death for Henry Sullivan. Date of death, June 12th of this year. Cause of death, heart failure. I touched the paper. It felt real. It looked official. It had a seal. But I was breathing. I was sitting here. Then I saw the notary stamp on the bottom. It was from a notary I did not recognize, someone named Reynolds. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Derek had not just lied to Veronica to get a business investment. He had committed a massive federal crime. He had forged a death certificate to trick the bank into believing I was dead. By proving I was dead and presenting a forged will naming him as executor, he had gained control of the title. He had then taken out a massive mortgage against the house, cashed out the equity, and spent it. He had stolen the house I bought for his family, and he had done it by killing me on paper. I looked around the room. I looked at the expensive golf clubs in the corner. I looked at the new computer on the desk. This was where the money went. He had been living like a king on the corpse of a father-in-law who was still very much alive. I folded the foreclosure notice and the death certificate. I placed them carefully into the inside pocket of my coat, right next to my heart. I stood up. The chair did not squeak this time. I walked out of the office, down the hallway, and back into the living room. I looked at the picture of Preston and Linda one last time. They looked so happy in the home I paid for, bought with the money Derek stole from my grave. I did not turn off the lights. I wanted them to know someone had been here. I walked out the front door and locked it behind me. The click of the lock sounded like the cocking of a gun. I walked down the path to the waiting Rolls-Royce. Arthur, the driver, opened the door for me. I slid into the back seat next to Veronica. She looked at me. She saw the pale rage in my face. She saw the way my hand was pressed against my chest, guarding the evidence I had found. "What did you find, Henry?" she asked softly. I looked at her. "He did not just lie about me being dead to you," I said. "He told the bank the same thing. He mortgaged the house. He cashed out the equity." Veronica's eyes went wide. "That is impossible," she said. Unless he has a death certificate," I finished. "Which he does. I found it." Veronica let out a low whistle. "That is 20 years in federal prison, Henry. That is wire fraud, identity theft, bank fraud." I nodded. "Take me to the party." "Veronica," I said. "Arthur," she said to the driver. "Step on it." As the car pulled away, I touched the pocket of my coat. I was no longer just a hurt father. I was a walking indictment, and I was about to deliver the verdict. The interior of the Rolls-Royce was quiet save for the soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic thumping of my own heart. I sat there next to Veronica, clutching the thick envelope I had taken from Derek's desk. My hands were no longer shaking. They were cold and steady, gripped around the paper with the force of a man holding a smoking gun. I pulled the rest of the documents out of the envelope. The death certificate and the foreclosure notice were just the beginning. As the passing streetlights cast intermittent shadows across the leather seats, I saw what else my son-in-law had been hiding. There, clipped to the back of the loan application, was a document that made my blood run cold. It was a general power of attorney. This was not a limited power of attorney, which would allow someone to handle specific tasks like paying bills or managing a single account. This was a general power granting Derek Sterling full unrestricted authority to act on my behalf in all matters: financial, medical, legal. With this piece of paper, he could drain my bank accounts, sell my stocks, and even make medical decisions if I were incapacitated. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the page. It was my name, Henry Sullivan. But unlike the clumsy forgery on the mortgage application, this signature looked disturbingly real. It was shaky, the lines a bit wavering, but the loop of the H and the sharp cross of the T were undeniably mine. I stared at the ink, trying to understand. I had never signed this. I had never given Derek this power. I would never hand over the keys to my life to a man who could not even balance his own checkbook. Then a memory surfaced. It hit me with the nausea of a physical blow. It was last month. November. I had come down with a severe case of the flu. I was bedridden for 3 days, burning with a fever of 102 degrees. My head had felt like it was stuffed with cotton, and my body ached so badly I could barely lift my arm. Megan had come over to check on me, which I thought was an act of kindness. She brought soup, and Derek came with her. I closed my eyes, the scene playing out in my mind with agonizing clarity. I was lying in bed, weak and disoriented. Derek had walked into the room holding a clipboard. He looked concerned. He played the part of the dutiful son-in-law perfectly. "Dad," he had said, his voice soft and soothing. "I know you are not feeling well, but we need to update your health insurance information. The policy is expiring, and if we do not get these forms in by 5 o'clock today, you might lose coverage." I remembered trying to sit up, reaching for my reading glasses on the nightstand. "Let me read it," I had rasped. No, do not strain yourself." Derek had insisted, gently pushing the clipboard into my hands. "It is just standard renewal forms, same as last year. Just sign at the X and we will handle the rest. Go back to sleep, Dad." We got this. I was sick, I was tired, and I trusted them. I trusted the man who married my daughter. I trusted the father of my grandson. So I signed. I signed where he pointed. I signed again on the next page, and again. I thought I was securing my health. In reality, I was signing away my freedom. I opened my eyes and looked at the document in the car. The date next to the signature confirmed it. November 14th, the day of the fever. He tricked me, I whispered, the realization tasting like ash in my mouth. He waited until I was sick. He waited until I was vulnerable. And then he slid a power of attorney into a stack of insurance papers. Veronica leaned over, looking at the document in my hand. Her sharp eyes scanned the legal text. She did not look shocked. She looked furious. "That is how he got the death certificate," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "With a general power of attorney, he could request vital records. He could manipulate your medical data. He probably used this to forge the doctor's attestation needed for the death certificate." She reached into the envelope and pulled out a small metallic object that had slid to the bottom. It was a rubber stamp. She held it up to the light. It was a notary seal. The name on the stamp was Reynolds. The same name on the fake death certificate. "He bought a fake notary stamp," Veronica said. "Or he had one made." "This is not just opportunism, Henry. This is a complex, premeditated criminal enterprise." She took the power of attorney from my hand and held it up. "Do you know what this is in the eyes of the law?" she asked. I shook my head slowly. "This is elder financial abuse," she said. "And combined with the forged death certificate and the mortgage fraud, it is a Class B felony. We are talking about 15 to 20 years in federal prison." He did not just cross a line. He obliterated it. I looked out the window. We were getting closer to the party, closer to the man who had done this to me. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It was the calm of a man who finally knows the truth. All the guilt I had felt about not being enough, all the sadness about being excluded, it was all gone. You do not feel guilty for cutting out a tumor. You just want it gone. I reached for my phone. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It was the private line of Gary Mitchell, my attorney for over 30 years. Gary was a shark in a suit, a man who ate fraudsters for breakfast. It rang twice. Henry Gary's voice was surprised. "It is Christmas Eve. Is everything all right?" "No, Gary," I said. "Nothing is all right. But it is about to be. I need you to do something for me right now." I continued, my voice steady and commanding. "Henry, I am with my grandkids." Gary started. "I am paying you triple your hourly rate, Gary, and when you hear what I have to say, you will want to do this for free." I heard the shift in his tone. He was listening. "Go ahead. I need you to draft 3 documents," I said. "First, I need a revocation of all powers of attorney granted to Derek Sterling, effective immediately. Second, I need an immediate eviction notice for the property in Lincoln Park, citing breach of trust and criminal misconduct. And third, I need you to draft a formal criminal complaint to the district attorney's office for identity theft, mortgage fraud, and forgery." There was a silence on the other end of the line, a long, heavy silence. Did he really do that?" Gary asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "I am holding the fake death certificate in my hand, Gary. I am holding the fake notary seal. He killed me, Gary. He tried to bury me while I was still breathing." I heard the sound of a chair scraping against a floor. Gary was moving. "I am going to my office," Gary said. "I will have the papers ready in an hour. I will file them electronically tonight." "No," I said. "Do not file them yet." "Why? 'Cause I want to serve them myself," I said. "I want to look him in the eye when he realizes that the dead man has returned. Send the drafts to my email," I instructed. "And Gary, call the bank. Freeze everything. The trust, the accounts, the cards. I want every cent of my money locked down tight. If he tries to buy so much as a pack of gum tonight, I want the card to decline." "Consider it done," Gary said. "And Henry, yes. Give him hell." I hung up the phone. I looked at Veronica. She was smiling. It was a fierce, approving smile. "You are a dangerous man, Henry Sullivan," she said. I put the documents back into the envelope and buttoned my coat. "I was a father," I said. "I was a provider. But tonight, I am the consequences of his actions." The car slowed down. We were pulling up to a large rented mansion in the suburbs. The driveway was full of luxury cars. The windows were glowing with warm light. I could see shadows of people moving inside, laughing, drinking, celebrating. Preston and Linda Sterling's house, the stronghold of the immediate family. I turned to Veronica. "Are you ready?" I asked. She adjusted her diamond earrings and smoothed her red dress. "I have been ready since the first martini," she said. The driver opened the door. The cold wind hit me again, but this time it felt bracing. It felt like fuel. I stepped out onto the pavement. I adjusted my scarf. I checked the pocket where the envelope sat against my chest. I walked toward the front door. Every step was a drumbeat of justice. I was not just crashing a party. I was bringing the storm. The ride to the suburbs was smooth, almost dangerously so. The Rolls-Royce Phantom cut through the winter storm like a shark moving through dark water. I sat in the back seat, the heated leather warming my back, but inside I felt cold. It was the cold, hard resolve of a man who has nothing left to lose. Next to me, Veronica looked out the window, her profile sharp against the passing streetlights. She was not just an investor anymore. She was my witness. She was the artillery I was bringing to a knife fight. I touched the inside pocket of my coat. The envelope was there. The forged death certificate. The fake power of attorney. The foreclosure notice. These papers were lighter than a feather, but they carried the weight of a prison sentence. An hour ago I had been Henry, the lonely old man. Henry, the widower. Henry, the checkbook. I had been sitting in my empty house staring at a box of Legos, wondering why I wasn't good enough to be included. But that man was gone. He had been left back at the bar of the Drake Hotel along with my half-finished scotch. The man sitting in this car was different. I was an architect. I spent my life looking for structural weaknesses in buildings. I knew how to spot a crack in the foundation. And tonight, I was going to bring the whole house down. We turned into the gated community where Derek's parents, Preston and Linda, were renting a mansion. It was a sprawling estate covered in festive lights that blinked in a manic, cheerful rhythm. It was a rental, of course. Everything about the Sterlings was rented. Their status, their lifestyle, their reputation. It was all borrowed, and most of it was borrowed from me without my permission. The driveway was lined with cars. I recognized a few of them. A Porsche, a Mercedes. Least likely. They were playing at being wealthy. They were playing at being the elite. And they were doing it while laughing at the dead man who paid for the champagne they were drinking. The driver, Arthur, stopped the car right in front of the massive double doors. The house glowed with a warm golden light. I could see shadows moving behind the sheer curtains. I could hear the faint sound of holiday music. It looked like a postcard. It looked like the perfect family Christmas. It was a lie. Veronica turned to me. She didn't smile this time. Her eyes were serious. "Remember, Henry," she said, her voice steady. "You do not have to shout. You do not have to make a scene. The truth is loud enough." I nodded. I did not plan to shout. Shouting is for people who are desperate to be heard. I did not need to be heard. I needed to be felt. Arthur opened my door. The wind hit me instantly, swirling snow around my legs. I stepped out onto the paved driveway. My dress shoes crunched against the ice. I buttoned my coat. I adjusted my scarf. I stood to my full height. My back pain, which had plagued me for years, seemed to vanish under the adrenaline. Veronica stepped out on the other side. She walked around the car and took my arm. Her grip was firm. We looked like a power couple arriving late to the gala. We looked like royalty. We walked up the front steps. They were lined with poinsettias. I wondered if my credit card had paid for those too. I reached the massive oak door. There was a brass knocker in the shape of a lion's head. I didn't use it. I reached for the doorbell. I paused for a split second. Inside that house was my daughter, Megan, the girl I had carried on my shoulders, the girl I had taught to ride a bike, the girl who had held my hand at her mother's funeral. I loved her. God help me, I still loved her. But love without respect is just a trap. And she had not just disrespected me, she had conspired to erase me. I pressed the button. A melodious chime echoed from deep inside the house. Bing, bong. I heard the music lower. I heard voices hush. Someone was coming. I heard footsteps approaching the door. Light, quick footsteps. I knew that rhythm. It was Megan. I felt Veronica squeeze my arm, a silent signal of support. The lock clicked. The handle turned. The heavy door swung open. Warm air rushed out, smelling of roasted turkey and cinnamon. And there she was. Megan was wearing a red velvet dress. She had a glass of white wine in her hand. A bright plastic smile was plastered on her face, ready to greet a late guest or perhaps a delivery driver. "Merry Christ," she began. The words died in her throat. Her eyes locked on mine. The glass of wine slipped from her fingers. It didn't shatter. It hit the thick welcome mat with a dull thud, splashing expensive Chardonnay across her shoes. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like a curtain falling. Her skin turned a translucent, sickly gray. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She looked as if she had seen a ghost, and in a way she had. She was looking at the father she had declared dead. She was looking at the victim who was supposed to be silent. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her. I looked at the fear in her eyes. I let the silence stretch out, heavy and suffocating, filling the space between us. Behind her down the hallway, I heard Derek's voice booming, full of fake confidence. "Who is it, honey? Is it the caterer?" Megan couldn't answer. She was paralyzed. She was shaking. I took a step forward, crossing the threshold. Veronica moved with me. Megan stumbled back, clutching the doorframe for support. "Hello, Megan," I said softly. My voice was calm, but it cut through the cold air like a razor. We were in the neighborhood. We thought we would stop by to wish the immediate family a very Merry Christmas. I stepped past my daughter, leaving her frozen in the open doorway like a statue of regret. The warmth of the hallway enveloped me, but it did not thaw the ice in my veins. Veronica walked beside me, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. It was a sound that announced our arrival better than any trumpet. We moved deeper into the house, following the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. The living room was a spectacle of borrowed wealth. A 12-foot fir tree touched the vaulted ceiling, draped in gold ribbons and crystals that shimmered under the chandelier light. A fire roared in the massive stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. About 20 people were gathered, holding flutes of champagne. I recognized the label on the bottle sitting on the side table. It was a vintage Dom Perignon from my personal cellar, a bottle I had been saving for my 75th birthday. They were drinking it as if it were soda water. The conversation in the room died down, rippling into silence from the entrance inward as heads turned to see the newcomers. And then I saw him. Derek was standing by the fireplace, one arm resting casually on the mantelpiece, the other holding a glass. He was mid-sentence, likely regaling his guests with another tale of his imaginary business prowess. He looked the part of the successful heir. He wore a velvet smoking jacket and loafers that cost more than most people's mortgage payments. When his eyes landed on me, the smile slid off his face as if it had been physically struck. His skin went the color of old ash. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked from me to Veronica, and I saw the exact moment his brain registered the catastrophe. He was looking at the man he had legally killed, standing next to the woman he was trying to defraud. His two worlds, the lie he told the bank and the lie he told the investors, had just collided in his living room. He began to make a strange, jerky motion with his hand. He was waving at his parents, who were standing near the buffet table, trying to signal them to stop, to be quiet, to do something. But it was a frantic, incoherent gesture that looked more like he was swatting at a swarm of invisible bees. His parents, Preston and Linda, did not see the panic. They only saw an interruption. Preston Sterling turned around. He was a large man with a red face and a loud voice, the kind of man who confuses volume with authority. He held a half-eaten shrimp cocktail in one hand. When he saw me, his expression shifted from surprise to a sneer of undisguised irritation. He did not know who Veronica was. To him, she was just some woman I had dragged in from the cold, and to him, I was just the inconvenient old man who refused to disappear. "Well, look who decided to grace us with his presence," Preston boomed, his voice carrying across the silent room. He took a step toward me, puffing out his chest. He looked around at his guests, inviting them to share in his disdain. "I thought you wanted to be alone tonight, Henry," Preston said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "That is what Megan told us. She said her father was too tired, too fragile for a party. And yet here you are." Derek let out a strangled noise. "Dad, please don't," he squeaked. But Preston ignored him. He was enjoying his audience. He walked closer to me, invading my personal space. I could smell the scotch on his breath. "This is a private gathering." Henry Preston continued, looking me up and down with contempt. "We wanted an intimate evening, just immediate family and close friends. We did not set a place for you at the table. Honestly, it is a bit rude of you to just show up unannounced. It makes you look desperate." I stood my ground. I did not blink. I let him dig his hole. I wanted him to keep talking. I wanted him to show Veronica exactly who he was. Derek was now moving toward us, stumbling slightly. "Dad, stop talking." Derek hissed, his eyes wide with terror. "Just stop. Why should I stop?" Preston laughed, looking back at his son. "I am just telling the truth. Henry here is confused. He thinks because he wrote a check once he owns us. But tonight is about your success, Derek. It is about the sterling legacy. We do not need a wet blanket dampening the mood." He turned back to me, his eyes narrowing. "And who is this?" Preston asked, gesturing rudely at Veronica with his shrimp tail. "Did you pick up a date at the retirement home, Henry? Or did you hire someone to pretend they like you so you wouldn't look so pathetic?" The room was deadly silent. The guests were shifting uncomfortably. Even they could feel that Preston had crossed a line. Derek looked like he was about to faint. He knew. He knew that his father had just insulted the most powerful woman in Chicago finance. He knew that every word coming out of Preston's mouth was another nail in his coffin. Veronica stepped forward. She moved with the grace of a queen and the lethality of a viper. She did not raise her voice. She did not look angry. She looked amused. It was a terrifying look. "I am not from the retirement home," Veronica said. Her voice was clear, melodic, and carried to every corner of the room. "And I am certainly not hired help." Preston scoffed. "Then who are you? And why did you bring him here?" "I brought him," Veronica said, locking eyes with Preston, "because I was under the impression that this family valued its investors." Preston froze. The word investor hung in the air. "I am Veronica King," she continued, "managing partner of King Holdings." The color drained from Preston's face. The shrimp tail fell from his fingers and landed on the Persian rug. He knew the name. Everyone in Chicago knew the name. King Holdings was the firm Derek had been bragging about for months. It was the Golden Goose. "And Henry here," Veronica said, slipping her arm through mine, "is my guest. In fact, he is the reason I decided to come tonight. I wanted to meet the man who raised such a spirited daughter." She looked over at Derek. "Isn't that right, Derek?" she asked. Derek was trembling. He nodded rapidly, unable to speak. Preston's demeanor changed so fast it was almost comical. The sneer vanished, replaced instantly by a wide, oily smile. His posture slumped from aggression to servitude. He wiped his hands on his pants and extended a hand toward Veronica. "Ms. King," he stammered, his voice jumping an octave. "Oh my goodness. I had no idea. Please forgive me, we were just joking. It is a family inside joke. We love Henry. We love having him here." He turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Right," Henry Preston said, patting my shoulder with fake affection. "You know I was just teasing. Old friends, right?" I looked at his hand on my shoulder. I looked at the sweat forming on his upper lip. I slowly reached up and removed his hand from my coat. I dusted off the spot where he had touched me. "I am not your friend, Preston," I said calmly. "And I am certainly not family." Preston laughed nervously. "Oh, stop it. You are such a kidder. Come in, come in. Let us get you a drink. Derek, get the Ms. King a glass of champagne. The good stuff." Derek scrambled toward the bar, happy to have a task that didn't involve speaking. Preston ushered us toward the dining table. The other guests parted like the Red Sea. They sensed the power shift. They knew that whatever game was being played, Henry Sullivan and the woman in red were winning. As we walked deeper into the room, Veronica leaned close to my ear. "He has no idea," she whispered. "He thinks he just insulted a guest. He doesn't know he just welcomed his executioner." I looked at Derek's back as he poured the wine with shaking hands. He knows I whispered back. And that is going to make the next 10 minutes very interesting. We took our seats at the long dining table. I sat at the end opposite Preston. Veronica sat to my right. The table was set with fine china and silver cutlery. My silver cutlery. I picked up a fork. I turned it over. My initials HS were engraved on the handle. Preston raised his glass. To family, he toasted, his voice shaky, and to new partners. I raised my glass. To the truth, I said. Derek dropped the bottle of champagne. It shattered on the floor, exploding into a puddle of foam and glass. But nobody moved to help him. All eyes were on me. The game had officially begun. The dining room was a theater of cruelty, and I was cast as the jester. Linda, Derek's mother, fluttered around the table with the nervous energy of a woman who knows her social standing is built on quicksand. She directed the seating arrangement with a sharp, dismissive hand. Veronica was ushered to the head of the table, the seat of honor usually reserved for the patriarch. She was given the high-backed velvet chair that looked like a throne. I, on the other hand, was guided to the far corner near the kitchen door. My seat was a wobbly wooden folding chair that had been brought up from the basement. It was a petty, calculated insult designed to make me feel small physically so that I would remain small socially. I sat down slowly. The chair creaked under my weight, a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden hush of the room. I looked down the long expanse of the table. It was laden with silver platters of roast beef, mountains of mashed potatoes, and crystal bowls of cranberry sauce. It was a feast paid for by the man sitting on the wobbly chair. Veronica caught my eye from the other end of the table. She raised one perfectly arched eyebrow. It was a silent question. "Are you seeing this?" I gave a microscopic nod. I was seeing it, and I was storing every detail away. Preston sat opposite Veronica, puffing out his chest like a pigeon. He was beaming drunk on the proximity to power. He poured wine into Veronica's glass with a heavy hand, spilling a few drops on the white tablecloth. "We are so honored to have you here, Ms. King." Preston gushed, ignoring the rest of his guests. "Derek has told us so much about his partnership with your firm. He says you two are going to change the skyline of Chicago." I watched Derek. He was sitting midway down the table, sandwiched between his wife and a confused-looking cousin. He was sweating profusely. Beads of perspiration were gathering on his forehead, threatening to drip down into his soup. He was terrified to look at me, and even more terrified to look at Veronica. He kept his eyes glued to his plate, pushing a green bean around with his fork, as if his life depended on it. I decided it was time to speak. I cleared my throat. It wasn't a loud sound, but it made Derek jump as if a gun had gone off. "So, Derek," I said, my voice pleasant and conversational, "tell us about this project. I have been so out of the loop lately. What exactly is the $20 million for?" Derek froze. He looked up, his eyes darting frantically between me and Veronica. He opened his mouth, but only a squeak came out. Preston intervened, laughing boisterously. "Oh, Henry, do not bore yourself with business talk. It is high-level finance. It would probably go right over your head. You just enjoy your potatoes." I smiled a thin, tight smile. I sliced a piece of beef. "I am just curious, Preston," I said. "After all, real estate is a passion of mine. Or at least it used to be. Before I retired." I turned my gaze back to Derek. "Is the project related to the house, Derek?" I asked. "The one in Lincoln Park?" Derek dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the china. "What house?" Linda asked, looking confused. "The one you live in?" "Yes," I said, leaning forward slightly. "The beautiful colonial on Fullerton Avenue. I was just wondering if you fixed that draft in the master bedroom. I remember when I signed the inspection papers 3 years ago, the contractor mentioned the insulation was thin in the north wall. Has that been addressed?" The air in the room grew heavy. Megan, sitting next to Derek, looked like she was about to be sick. She stared at the centerpiece, her knuckles white as she gripped the tablecloth. Derek let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "Oh, Dad," he said, shaking his head. "You are confused again. We fixed that ages ago, and you did not sign the inspection papers." "I did. You know how your memory gets these days. It mixes things up." He looked at Veronica with a pleading expression. "He is getting a bit senile," Derek lied, tapping his temple. "We have to be patient with him. He thinks he is still running things, but he gets the details all wrong. It is sad, really." Veronica took a slow sip of her wine. She set the glass down with a deliberate click. "Is that so?" she asked, her voice cool and detached. "So Henry did not buy the house." Derek choked on his water. He coughed violently, grabbing his napkin. "No, no," Derek sputtered, wiping his mouth. "I mean, he helped with some advice, sure. But I bought the house. It is in my name. I have been paying the mortgage for years. It is my asset. That is why I used it as collateral for our deal, Ms. King. It is 100% sterling property." I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. He was not just lying about the past. He was doubling down on the fraud right in front of the victim. He was claiming ownership of the roof over his head, the roof I had placed there. Preston, sensing an opportunity to praise his son, slammed his hand on the table. "Exactly," Preston bellowed. "Derek is a self-made man. He has never taken a handout in his life. Unlike some people." He glared at me down the length of the table. The alcohol had made him bold, and the presence of a billionaire had made him reckless. He wanted to elevate his son by standing on my neck. "You know," Henry Preston continued, his voice dripping with condescension, "you should be grateful that Derek and Megan let you come around at all. Most children would have put you in a home by now. But they are saints. They let you pretend you are still important." I stopped eating. I placed my knife down. "Is that what they do, Preston?" I asked softly. "They are charitable." Preston scoffed. "They certainly are. Look at you. You sit there eating their food, drinking their wine, criticizing their house. You are a burden, Henry. That is the ugly truth. You are an old man who has nothing left to offer, so you leech off the success of the younger generation. You eat off their plates and then complain about the service. It is embarrassing." The room was silent. Even the other guests looked down, uncomfortable with the cruelty of the attack. Megan let out a small sob, but she did not defend me. She did not say a word. She just sat there and let her father-in-law strip me of my dignity. I looked at Megan. I waited for her to speak. I waited for her to say, "Mo, that is not true. My father paid for everything. My father gave us the world." But she remained silent. That silence broke the last chain binding me to them. It severed the final artery of affection. I looked at Veronica. She was staring at Preston with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. She gave me a barely perceptible nod. It was time. I picked up my napkin and dabbed the corners of my mouth. Then I folded it neatly and placed it next to my plate. I picked up my fork and my knife. I held them for a second, feeling the weight of the silver. Then I dropped them onto the porcelain plate. Clack! The sound was sharp and loud in the silent room. It sounded like a judge's gavel hitting the bench. I pushed my chair back. The wobbly legs scraped against the floor with a harsh screech. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I adjusted my cuffs. I looked at Preston, then at Derek, then at Megan. "You call me a burden," I said, my voice rising just enough to fill the room without shouting. "You call me a leech. You say I am eating off your plates and living off your charity." I reached into the inside pocket of my coat. I felt the thick envelope against my chest. I pulled it out. "You say this house belongs to the Sterling legacy," I continued, holding the envelope up for everyone to see. "You say Derek is a self-made man who bought this property with his own sweat and blood." I tossed the envelope onto the table. It slid across the smooth white cloth, knocking over a salt shaker, and came to a stop right in front of Derek's plate. Derek stared at it, as if it were a venomous snake. "Eating off your charity," I repeated, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. Interesting choice of words, because according to the bank and according to the deed in that envelope, this house does not belong to you, Derek. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table, looming over the son-in-law who had tried to bury me. "It belongs to the man you claimed was dead." Derek's face crumbled. "So let us stop talking about charity," I said, "and let us start talking about ownership." The thick manila envelope sat on the white tablecloth like a landmine waiting to be detonated. The slide across the table had been smooth, but the impact was heavy. It stopped inches from Derek's plate, right next to his trembling hand. The entire room had gone quiet. The only sound was the crackling of the logs in the fireplace and the soft, nervous breathing of 20 people who suddenly wished they were anywhere else. I watched Derek. He stared at the envelope with a mixture of horror and nausea. He knew exactly what was inside. He knew that the moment he touched that paper, his life as he pretended to live it was over. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, feeling the ground crumble beneath his feet. "Go ahead, Derek," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "Open it. Show your parents the legacy you have been building." Derek did not move. He could not move. He was paralyzed by the weight of his own lies. Preston, his father, looked between me and the envelope. His face was red, confused, and angry. "What is this nonsense?" Henry Preston barked, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "What are you trying to prove?" "Since Derek seems unable to perform his duties as the head of the household," I said. Keeping my eyes locked on my son-in-law, allow me to summarize the contents of that package. I stood up straighter, buttoning my jacket. I addressed the room as if I were presenting a final design to a board of directors. "Inside that envelope there are 3 very interesting documents," I began. "The first is the original deed to the house at 4500 Fullerton Avenue, the house that Derek just claimed he bought. The deed lists only one owner, Henry Sullivan. It was purchased in cash 3 years ago. There is no cosigner. There is no mortgage, or at least there wasn't supposed to be." I walked slowly around the table, moving closer to where Megan sat. She had her hands over her face, sobbing quietly. "The second document," I continued, my voice dropping to a lower, colder register, "is a death certificate. It is a certificate for a man named Henry Sullivan. It states that on June 12th of this year, I died of heart failure in my sleep." A gasp rippled through the room. A woman in a sequined dress covered her mouth. Linda, Derek's mother, let out a small, strangled sound. "June 12th, I repeated. I remember that day clearly. I was gardening. I was planting hydrangeas in the backyard of my own home. I was very much alive. I was breathing. I was waiting for a call from my daughter that never came. But according to Derek, and according to the notary stamp he forged, I was a corpse. I stopped right behind Megan's chair. I did not touch her. I just let my presence loom over her. And because I was dead, I said the executor of my estate needed to liquidate some assets. That brings us to the third document, a notice of default from the bank." I looked directly at Preston. "You asked if I was a burden, Preston. You asked if I was eating off your charity. The truth is, your son used that fake death certificate to take out a cash-out refinance loan on my house. He forged my signature. He stole $1.2 million of equity from a dead man." I pointed at the lavish decorations, the expensive catering, the vintage wine. "That is where the money came from," I said. "You are not drinking Derek's success. You are drinking my stolen property. You are celebrating Christmas on the grave you dug for me." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum. Nobody moved. Nobody drank. The air in the room felt thin, as if the truth had sucked out all the oxygen. Derek finally moved. He slumped forward, burying his head in his hands. He looked small. He looked defeated. "It was not supposed to be like this," Derek whispered into his palms. I was going to pay it back. I just needed time. Time, I asked. You had time. You had 3 years of my support. You had a free house. You had my silence. But that was not enough. You wanted to be the king, but you did not want to build the kingdom. You just wanted to steal the crown. I turned to Veronica. She had been watching the scene unfold with the impassive judgment of a Greek goddess. She had not eaten a bite of her food. She had just observed. Now she placed her napkin on the table. It was a signal. The social visit was over. The business execution was about to begin. Veronica stood up. She did not need to shout to command the room. Her presence alone was enough. "Mr. Sterling," she said, addressing Derek's hunched form. "In my line of work, we look for 3 things in a partner: vision, competence, and integrity. Tonight, I have seen none of them." She picked up her glass of wine, looked at it, and then set it back down as if it were contaminated. "Based on the evidence Mr. Sullivan has presented and the due diligence my team conducted while we were driving here, King Holdings is formally rescinding its offer of investment." Derek looked up, tears streaming down his face. "No, please, Miss King. You cannot do that. The deal is signed. We have a term sheet. A term sheet based on fraudulent data is void ab initio." Veronica said, her voice sharp as a diamond cutter. "You claimed assets you do not own. You claimed a lineage that does not exist. And you claimed a solvency that is a fiction." She reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone. Furthermore, she added, delivering the final blow, "As a federally regulated financial institution, we are required by law to report any attempted wire fraud. My corporate counsel is currently transmitting the file, including your forged application and the fake death certificate, to the Economic Crimes Division of the Chicago Police Department and the FBI." The acronym FBI hung in the air like a thunderclap. Linda let out a wail. "My son," she cried. "Not the police, please, not the police." Veronica looked at Linda with cool pity. "I am afraid it is out of my hands, Mrs. Sterling. Fraud is not a family squabble. It is a crime. And your son tried to defraud the wrong woman." Veronica turned to me. Her eyes softened slightly, just for a fraction of a second. "I believe we are done here, Henry. The air in this room has become quite stale." I nodded. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was clarity. I looked at the people around the table. The friends, the hangers-on, the sycophants. They were all looking at Derek with disgust. The illusion was shattered. The golden boy was revealed to be nothing more than a thief in a velvet jacket. But the final twist of the knife did not come from me. It came from the head of the table. Preston Sterling stood up. His face was a mask of purple rage. He was not looking at me. He was not looking at Veronica. He was looking at his son. Preston walked over to where Derek was sitting. He grabbed Derek by the shoulder and hauled him up. Derek stumbled, looking terrified. "Dad!" "I can explain," Derek stammered. "Explain!" Preston roared, spraying spit across the table. "Explain what? You told me you were the chairman of the board. You told me the house was paid off. You told me you were funding this party with your bonus." Preston shook him violently. $1.2 million, Derek Preston shouted. "You mortgaged the house for over $1 million. Where is the money?" "It is invested," Derek cried. "It is in the business." "What business?" Preston screamed. "The business that just walked out the door. The business that is calling the FBI." Preston released him, pushing him back into the chair. Derek collapsed like a rag doll. Then the realization hit Preston. I could see it in his eyes. The fear. The selfish, preserving fear of a man who realizes he is standing next to a sinking ship. You told me you paid off my car, Preston whispered, his voice trembling. You told me you paid off your mother's credit cards last month. Did you use the stolen money for that? Derek did not answer. He just sobbed. Preston turned pale. He looked at me. For the first time all night, there was no arrogance in his eyes, only terror. Henry Preston stammered. We did not know. You have to believe us. We thought he was successful. We thought the money was clean. If he used stolen money to pay our debts, that makes us accessories. I looked at Preston. I looked at the fear that was finally rightfully consuming him. That sounds like a legal question, Preston, I said calmly. You might want to call a lawyer. I suggest you do it quickly. The police are on their way. I turned my back on them. I offered my arm to Veronica. Shall we? I asked. We walked toward the door. Behind us, the sounds of the immediate family disintegrating filled the air. Linda was screaming at Megan. Preston was shouting at Derek. The guests were scrambling to find their coats, desperate to flee, before the sirens arrived. I did not look back. I stepped out into the snow, taking a deep breath of the clean, cold air. The nightmare was over, and for the first time in years, I was wide awake. The dinner party did not end. It detonated. The explosion was not caused by a bomb, but by the truth I had placed on the table. For years, the Sterling family had projected an image of perfect, effortless wealth. They were the golden people who lived above the consequences that governed the rest of us. But in the span of 5 minutes, that image had been stripped away, leaving behind something ugly and desperate. I stood there, my hand resting lightly on the back of my chair, watching the chaos unfold with the detachment of a surgeon observing a procedure. I felt no satisfaction, only a grim sense of finality. The people in this room were not mourning the crime Derek had committed. They were mourning the loss of their own status. Preston Sterling was the first to break. The man who had spent the entire evening looking down his nose at me was now vibrating with a rage that was entirely self-preserving. He did not care that his son had stolen from me. He cared that his son had been caught in front of Veronica King. He cared that the Sterling name, which he had polished so carefully with lies, was now stained with the word fraud. He grabbed Derek by the lapels of his velvet jacket. The fabric bunched up in his fists. He shook him violently, his face turning a deep, alarming shade of purple. "You idiot," Preston screamed, his voice cracking. "You absolute moron! You told me the money was real. You told me the investors were lined up. I introduced you to my friends. I vouched for you at the club." Derek was sobbing now, a pathetic, broken sound that seemed too small for a grown man. "Dad, please," he whimpered. "I can fix it. I just need time." "Fix it!" Preston roared, shoving him backward. Derek stumbled and fell against the buffet table. A platter of roast beef slid off and crashed onto the floor, splattering gravy across the expensive Persian rug. Nobody moved to clean it up. "How are you going to fix a felony, Derek? How are you going to fix the FBI knocking on my door? You have ruined us. You have made us look like fools." Linda Derek's mother was not helping. She was clutching her pearl necklace as if it were a rosary. She looked at the guests who were hurriedly grabbing their coats, desperate to escape the blast zone. "Wait, do not go," Linda cried out to a couple near the door. "It is all a misunderstanding. Derek just made a mistake with the paperwork. Please stay for dessert." But nobody stayed. They looked at the Sterling family with a mixture of pity and revulsion. They knew a sinking ship when they saw one, and they were scrambling for the lifeboats. In the middle of this wreckage sat my daughter, Megan. She had not moved from her chair. She was staring at her husband, who was currently cowering on the floor while his father screamed insults at him. She looked at the ruined food. She looked at the empty chairs where her friends had been sitting. And then finally, she looked at me. I saw the gears turning in her mind. She realized that Derek was finished. The money was gone. The prestige was gone. The house was gone. The only thing left standing in the room, the only stable ground in this earthquake, was her father. She stood up. Her legs were shaky. She walked toward me, navigating through the broken glass and spilled wine. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup, leaving black streaks of mascara on her cheeks. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling. I did not answer. I just watched her come closer. She reached out and grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, desperate. She fell to her knees, burying her face in the fabric of my coat. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times before. It was the same move she used when she crashed her first car. It was the same move she used when she overspent on her credit cards in college. "Daddy, please," she sobbed. "I did not know you. You have to believe me. I swear on my life I did not know what he was doing." I looked down at the top of her head. I remembered braiding her hair when she was 6. I remembered the smell of her shampoo. But that memory felt like it belonged to a different life. "He lied to me too," Megan cried, tightening her grip on my coat. "He told me the business was booming. He told me he bought the house with his bonus. I am a victim here too, Dad. He tricked me. He forced me to go along with things. I was scared of him. I listened to her words. I wanted to believe them. Every instinct in my body as a father screamed at me to kneel down, to pick her up, to tell her that it would be all right, that I would fix it. I could write a check. I could hire a defense attorney. I could make the nightmare go away. But then I remembered the text message. Just immediate family. I remembered the look on her face when I walked in the door. It wasn't fear of Derek. It was shame. It was the guilt of a co-conspirator who had been caught. She hadn't called me when Derek brought home the new car. She hadn't called me when they threw this lavish party. She was happy to live in the lie as long as it was profitable. She was only crying now because the check had bounced. I reached down. My hands were cold. I took her wrists and firmly, deliberately removed her hands from my coat. I stepped back, creating a physical distance between us. She looked up at me, shocked. She had never been rejected by me in her entire life. She didn't know what it felt like. "Do not lie to me, Megan," I said. My voice was low, but in the sudden silence of the room it sounded like thunder. I did not know, she pleaded again. "You knew enough to exclude me," I said. "You knew enough to send that text message. You knew enough to sit here and eat this dinner while your husband mocked me. You watched him humiliate me for 3 years, Megan. And you did not say a word. You did not defend me. You joined him." I looked over at Derek, who was wiping his nose with his sleeve, and then back at my daughter. "You wanted a life without me," I said. "You wanted the money without the man. Well, congratulations, Megan. You have your wish." "Dad, please," she wailed. "We are family." I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "I am just a guest, a rude, uninvited guest." I pointed at Preston and Linda, who were watching us with wide, terrified eyes, and I pointed at Derek, the fraudster, on the floor. "Look around you, Megan," I said. "These people are your family. You chose them. You prioritized them. You protected them. They are your immediate family." I buttoned my coat. I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden of trying to buy their love was finally gone. "I am just an outsider," I said, "and outsiders do not bail you out of federal crimes." I turned to the room at large. I wanted everyone to hear this. I wanted there to be no ambiguity about what was going to happen next. "I am the owner of the house at 4500 Fullerton Avenue," I announced. "The deed is in my pocket. The bank is aware of the fraud." I looked at Derek, then at Megan. "You are trespassing on my property," I said. "I am giving you 24 hours to vacate the premises." Megan gasped. "Dad, you can't. Where will we go? We have no money. The accounts are frozen." "That is not my problem," I said. "You have 24 hours. If you are still in my house at 8 o'clock tomorrow evening, I will have the sheriff remove you, and I will have the locks changed." "But it is Christmas," Linda shouted from across the room. "You cannot throw them out on Christmas. Have you no heart?" I looked at Linda. I thought about the star on top of my tree at home. I thought about the lonely scotch at the bar. "I had a heart," I said. "But you broke it." I turned to Veronica. She was waiting by the door. She looked proud. She looked like a general who had just watched her soldier win a medal. I offered her my arm. "Ms. King," I said, "I believe we have overstayed our welcome." Veronica took my arm. Her grip was warm and solid. "I believe you are right, Henry," she said. "The atmosphere in here is toxic." We walked toward the door. We did not hurry. We walked with the measured pace of people who have nothing to hide. Behind us, the sobbing started again, louder this time, mixed with the sounds of accusations and panic. Megan was screaming my name. Derek was begging his father for a lawyer. I did not look back. I stepped out of the house and into the night. The snow had stopped falling. The air was crisp and clean. The silence of the winter night felt like a blessing. I walked down the steps, leaving the warmth of the fake family behind, and stepped into the cold, honest world. I had lost a daughter that night, it was true. But as I looked at the woman walking beside me and felt the self-respect returning to my soul, I knew I had found something much more valuable. I had found myself. The wheels of justice turn slowly, they say, but the wheels of a major financial institution turn with terrifying speed when their money is missing. It took exactly 7 days for the reality of the situation to catch up with Derek Sterling. I was not there to see it happen, but the neighbors were kind enough to provide me with the details later. They told me it happened at 6 in the morning at the rented mansion of Preston and Linda. The morning mist was still clinging to the manicured lawns when 3 unmarked sedans rolled up the driveway. They were followed by a black and white patrol car. Derek was reportedly asleep in the basement when the pounding on the door began. He did not come out in a velvet jacket this time. He was dragged out in a pair of stained sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hands cuffed behind his back. The charge was not a misunderstanding. It was bank fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. The bank had moved aggressively. They do not like being tricked by a forged death certificate, and they certainly do not like losing over $1 million. Preston Sterling stood on the porch, screaming at the officers. He was not defending his son's innocence. He was screaming that this was a mistake, that he knew the mayor, that this was embarrassing for him personally. He did not look at Derek once. As the police car pulled away, taking the golden boy to a holding cell where no amount of charm could save him, Preston reportedly went back inside and slammed the door. That slam was the sound of the immediate family closing ranks, and this time Megan was on the wrong side of the door. I learned later that day that my daughter had been officially evicted from the Lincoln Park house. I had kept my word. At 8 o'clock on Christmas night, I had contacted the sheriff. By the next morning, the locks were changed. Megan had nowhere to go. She had no money, no credit cards that worked, and a husband in federal custody. So she went to the only place she had left. She went to the damp, unfinished basement of her in-laws' rental property. I can only imagine the humiliation. For years, Megan had looked down on people who struggled. She had turned up her nose at my modest lifestyle, preferring the illusion of grandeur. Now she was sleeping on a pull-out couch next to a noisy furnace surrounded by boxes of Preston's old tax returns and Linda's discarded holiday decorations. The air down there smelled of mildew and regret. She tried to call me. My phone logged the attempts. Monday, 10 calls. Tuesday, 20 calls. Wednesday, just 5. I never heard a single ring. I had gone to my service provider the morning after the party and had her number, Derek's number, and the numbers of Preston and Linda permanently blocked. It was a digital wall as high and as thick as the one they had built around their Christmas party. I did not listen to her voicemails. I did not read the desperate texts that I assumed she tried to send from borrowed phones. I knew what they would say. They would be apologies wrapped in excuses. They would be pleas for money disguised as pleas for forgiveness. She would say she was sorry, but she would mean she was uncomfortable. She would say she loved me, but she would mean she needed me. I could not afford to hear it. A surgeon does not hesitate when cutting out gangrene. If he pauses, if he feels pity for the dying limb, the infection spreads to the heart. Megan was the infection, and I chose to survive. Instead of answering the phone, I went to work. I walked into the house at 4500 Fullerton Avenue for the last time on Thursday. The house was silent. It was empty of people, but it was full of ghosts. I walked through the living room where I had once bounced my grandson on my knee. I walked into the kitchen where I had cooked Thanksgiving dinners. The house was beautiful. It was a masterpiece of architecture, but it felt tainted. Every wall, every floorboard, every window felt smeared with the grease of Derek's lies and Megan's betrayal. I could not live here. I could not rent it out. I could not even look at it without feeling a wave of nausea. It had to go. I called a real estate agent I had known for 40 years. I told him to list it immediately. He asked me about the price. He told me the market was soft. He told me we should wait for spring to get the best value. I told him I did not care about the value. I cared about the speed. Sell it, I said. Undercut the market by 20%. I want it gone by the end of the week. He thought I was crazy, but he did as I asked. The house sold in 48 hours to a young couple from the suburbs. They were excited. They saw a beautiful home at a bargain price. They did not see the crime scene that I saw. The closing was fast. The money was wired to my account. The first thing I did was pay off the fraudulent mortgage. Even though the loan was illegal, even though I could have fought the bank in court for years to prove I didn't sign it, I simply paid it. I wanted the connection severed. I wanted Derek's name off the title, off the lien, off everything. I paid the bank $1.2 million of my own money to clean up his mess. It was a high price for peace of mind, but it was worth every penny. After the debt was cleared and the agent's fees were paid, there was a surplus. The house had appreciated in value over the last 3 years. Even after paying off Derek's theft, there was a profit of nearly $300,000. I sat in my study on Friday afternoon staring at the check. $300,000. It was enough to set Megan up in a small apartment. It was enough to buy her a used car. It was enough to get her out of that damp basement and give her a fresh start. My hand hovered over the checkbook. I thought about her crying on the floor. I thought about the cold winter nights. I was a father. The instinct to protect was woven into my DNA. It would be so easy to write her a check. Just a small one. Just enough to help her survive until the trial. But then I remembered the photo. I remembered the photo of her and Derek and his parents laughing and drinking champagne, celebrating their immediate family, while I sat alone. I remembered that they didn't just spend my money. They spent my dignity. They mortgaged my life to fund their fantasy. If I gave her this money, I would not be helping her. I would be teaching her that there are no consequences. I would be teaching her that if she cries hard enough, Daddy will always come to the rescue. I would be robbing her of the only lesson that could possibly save her soul, the lesson of rock bottom. I picked up the pen. I did not write Megan's name. Instead, I wrote the name of a charity, the St. Jude's Home for the Elderly. It was a facility that cared for seniors who had been abandoned or abused by their families. It was a place for people who had no one. I wrote the check for the full amount, $312,450. I put it in an envelope. I sealed it. I put a stamp on it. I walked to the mailbox at the end of my driveway. The air was cold, but the sun was shining. I dropped the envelope into the slot. As the metal flap clanged shut, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying. I knew what people would say. They would say I was heartless. They would say I was a bitter old man who took revenge on his own flesh and blood. They would say that a father's love should be unconditional, but they are wrong. Love is unconditional, but access is not. I still loved my daughter. I prayed for her every night, but I would no longer finance her destruction. I would no longer allow her to use me as a shield against the real world. I walked back up the driveway to my own house, my real house, the one I had built, the one that was empty, yes, but clean. I poured myself a glass of water and sat by the window. I watched the squirrels chasing each other in the snow. I thought about Megan in the basement. I hoped she was cold. I hoped she was uncomfortable. Because it is only in the cold that we learn to appreciate the warmth. It is only when we have nothing that we learn the value of everything. I had been cruel, yes. I had been ruthless. But as I watched the sun set over the trees, I realized that sometimes cruelty is the only form of justice that sticks. I had protected my name. I had protected my legacy. And for the first time in a long time, I had respected the man I saw in the mirror. Time heals all wounds, they say. But I have found that time does not just heal, it clarifies. It strips away the noise and leaves you with the essential truth of your life. It has been 6 months since the night I walked out of the Sterling mansion. It is Christmas Eve again. But this year, the silence in my chest is not the heavy, suffocating silence of loneliness. It is the peaceful silence of a man who is exactly where he belongs. I am standing on the balcony of a private chalet in Aspen, Colorado. The air is thin and crisp, smelling of pine and wood smoke. Below me, the village twinkles with thousands of holiday lights, looking like a handful of diamonds scattered on black velvet. Behind me, through the glass doors, I can hear the warmth of a party that is actually real. Veronica is there. She is laughing at a joke told by a retired federal judge. She is wearing a silver dress tonight, looking every bit the Iron Lady of Finance, but her eyes are kind. We did not become lovers. That would have been too simple, too cliché. We became something far more rare and valuable. We became partners. We became the family we both needed. We travel together. We invest together. We protect each other. Inside the room are other people like us. Men and women who have built empires, who have lost things, and who understand that at our age, time is the most expensive currency we have. Nobody here is looking at my watch to see if they can inherit it. Nobody is asking me for a loan. They are asking me about my opinion on modern architecture. They are asking me to share a bottle of wine because they enjoy my company, not my credit limit. I reached into the pocket of my thick wool cardigan. My fingers brushed against a piece of cardstock. It arrived yesterday, forwarded to me by my attorney, Gary. It was a postcard. On the front there was a generic picture of a snowman. On the back, in handwriting that looked hurried and desperate, was a message from Megan. Dad, it read. We are living in a small apartment in Cicero. Derek is awaiting trial in March. It is going to be a hard winter. Leo asks about you every day. He misses his grandpa. Please, Dad. Just call us. We can start over. Love, Megan. I looked at the words. 6 months ago, this would have broken me. I would have read the part about my grandson, and my resolve would have crumbled. I would have been on the first plane back to Chicago with my checkbook in hand. But I am not that man anymore. I read the message again. I looked for an apology, a real one. I looked for an admission of the pain she caused. I looked for a promise to make things right, regardless of money. It was not there. All I saw was a list of complaints. We are in a small apartment. It is a hard winter. It was a guilt trip disguised as a greeting. She was using my grandson, an innocent child, as a bargaining chip to drag me back into the drama. She did not miss me. She missed the safety net. She missed the immediate family that paid the bills. I slid the glass door open and stepped back into the warmth of the living room. The fire was roaring in the massive stone hearth. The flames licked at the logs, hungry and bright. Veronica looked up as I entered. She saw the card in my hand. She didn't say anything. She just tilted her head slightly, a silent question in her eyes. I walked over to the fireplace. The heat flushed my cheeks. I looked at the postcard one last time. I thought about Megan in her small apartment. I hoped, truly hoped, that she would find the strength to leave Derek. I hoped she would get a job. I hoped she would learn to stand on her own 2 feet. But I knew that I could not teach her that lesson by cushioning the fall. I tossed the card into the fire. It landed on a burning log. For a second, nothing happened. Then the edges began to curl. The picture of the snowman blackened. The ink of my daughter's handwriting bubbled and vanished. A burst of orange flame consumed it, turning the plea for money into gray ash. It floated up the chimney and was gone. I felt a deep, resonant sense of closure. I was not angry. I was just done. Henry Veronica called out softly. "We are about to open a bottle of vintage port. Will you join us?" I turned away from the fire. I looked at the group of friends waiting for me. I saw respect in their eyes. I saw welcome. "I am coming," I said. I walked toward them, leaving the ashes behind. As I took the glass of wine, I looked out the window at the snow-covered mountains one last time. I realized something profound. I spent 40 years of my life as an architect. I designed steel beams that could hold up the sky. I poured concrete foundations that could last for centuries. I thought those were my greatest achievements. I thought my legacy was in the skyline of Chicago. I was wrong. The hardest thing to build is not a skyscraper. It is boundaries. The most difficult foundation to lay is not concrete. It is self-respect. For 70 years, I let people walk through the doors of my life without checking their credentials. I let them squat in my heart without paying rent. I let them tear down my walls because I shared their blood. But now the renovation is complete. The fortress is secure. I raised my glass to the room. "To family," I said. "To the family we choose," Veronica answered, clinking her glass against mine. I took a sip. It was sweet and warm. "I am Henry Sullivan. I am 71 years old. And for the first time in my life, I am not just a father or a husband or an architect. I am a free man. And that is a structure that no storm can ever knock down." Later that evening, as the fire died down to glowing embers and the guests began to retire to their rooms, Veronica handed me a small rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. "No occasion," she said with a soft smile. "Just because." I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was not a luxury watch or a gold cufflink gifts that Derek would have drooled over. It was a simple, high-quality leather sketchbook and a set of charcoal pencils. "I remember you told me once that you used to draw for fun before architecture became just a business," she whispered. I ran my thumb over the grain of the leather. For decades, I had only drawn blueprints, contracts, and structures meant for other people. I had forgotten the simple joy of creating something just for myself. I walked to the window, looking out at the vast, silent mountains bathed in moonlight. Far away in a cramped apartment in Cicero, my daughter was likely sleeping in the cold reality she had chosen. I didn't feel triumph anymore, just a distant pity for people who had traded diamonds for glass. They were freezing in a winter of their own making, while I finally stood in the warmth. I opened the book to the first page. I didn't draw a building. I didn't draw a foundation. I sketched the jagged line of the mountain horizon, wild, untamed, and open. For the first time in 40 years, I wasn't designing a cage for someone else to live in. I was sketching my own future. The charcoal moved freely across the paper, unburdened by expectations, just like the rest of my life. The story of Henry Sullivan teaches us a brutal but necessary truth. You teach people how to treat you. For years, Henry allowed his generosity to be mistaken for weakness and his love to be exploited as an obligation. We often cling to toxic family members because we share a history, but history is not a license for abuse. Real family is not defined by DNA, but by behavior. If someone constantly disrespects you, uses you, and erases your worth, you have every right to revoke their access to your life. Protecting your peace is not an act of cruelty. It is the highest form of self-respect. Thank you for listening to my story. If Henry's journey gave you the courage to set a boundary in your own life, please hit the like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And I want to know from you, do you think Henry was right to burn the postcard? Or should he have given his daughter one last chance? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about justice and resilience. See you in the next video.